Hello everyone, I am Priyanshi, your host for VIMARSH, a video podcast series by Adhyayan Foundation for Policy and Research. Stay tuned for some amazing podcasts coming your way. To the maiden episode of VIMARSH, a video podcast by AFPR. Today we have with us a very special guest. I won't take his name yet. He's an M.Phil candidate at the University of Oxford, where he's studying the role, status, and regulation of political parties and partisanship in modern constitutionalism with a focus on India. He completed LLM at Yale Law School as an INLAC scholar and served as a resident fellow at Yale Information Society Project. Before joining Oxford, he was a visiting scholar and Yale Fox International Fellow at the Center for Comparative Constitutional Study, Melbourne Law School. He completed his BA LLB honors at the National Law School of India University as the best outgoing student. He has also won 3 gold medals, including HMC Roy Medal in Constitutional Law, and served as a joint convener of the Legal Services Clinic, editor-in-chief of the Indian Journal of Law and Technology, and an editor of the National Law School India Review. He has received the 2019 Indian Law Review Best Article Prize for his article, Where's the Party? Towards a constitutional biography of political parties. He has authored columns for Dainik Bhaskar, Dainik Jagran, Indian Express, and The Hindu. His research interests lie in public law, law and technology, political economy, and regulation. I think his bio is enough to keep you all hooked till the end of this podcast. He's none other than Aradhya Sethia. Welcome, Aradhya. It's so lovely to have you for the first episode of our podcast. How are you feeling about it?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for creating this new platform. Wish you all the best, and thank you for having me.
Thank you. So, firstly, let me begin by asking you the new normal question these days. How has this COVID situation and lockdown treated you, Aradhya?
Well, I've been privileged. In my life as a researcher, nothing much has changed in terms of my professional working. I couldn't access a few libraries and resources, but apart from that, mostly given the situation around us, it kind of it reminds you of how privileged you are and um, how to put it to use. But otherwise, COVID crisis, as most crises do, right, sort of remind us of what are the things that are dearest to us, what are the things that are not, and I believe that is one of the biggest personal contribution of the crisis that could have in many people's lives, especially people who would not have to worry about the daily survival, which for many people is the case that this crisis has brought.
Yeah, I agree. I think it has given us a lot of time to introspect and, consider ourselves privileged to be safe in this pandemic. So, rather moving on, let me start from the very basics. How did law happen? I mean, did you stumble upon it? Was it by chance, or you've always wanted to dive into it? Because for me, it was like I wanted to do anything but engineering, so I did law. So, what about you?
Um, no, luckily it wasn't that in my case. It was, but at the same time, it was not a very well planned move. I mean,
Mhm.
um, so I was mostly interested in humanities with the social sciences, and I realized that in 10th standard that I was really enjoying all my courses. Um, I grew up in a small town in Madhya Pradesh called Javra, which is near Ratlam, which is a bit more famous because of
Yeah,
Bollywood and other
jab we
things.
met.
Yes. I mean, famous or infamous, but so I grew up in that small town, and the access to social science, humanities education was a bit difficult. And as you said, generally Indian parents and hence in some ways Indian students would also prefer for sort of and for legitimate reasons, I think safety of career options, having a stable job, all of that is important for middle class parents and probably students as well. And hence, ordinary options were medicine, engineering, perhaps CA, chart and accountancy, and probably go on to do an MBA, those kind of options. Um, but it kind of appeared to me towards the end of 10th that, and I had recently gotten access to internet, which is a big thing. Then I got access to it a little late in my life, both because of my parents and because of just being in a small town. So, and I realized that that it need not just be my sort of interest till 10th, it could expand beyond that. So I decided to study humanities, but it was difficult because this education is difficult to come by and is particularly not available for 11th and 12th standards in the place where I was at. And my initial plan was to actually keep studying one of the subjects, economics, politics, or history, three subjects which interested me most. Um, when I was in, when I started studying for my 11th and 12th standard, I moved to Delhi, and after speaking to a few people, I realized, wait, if there is one course which should combine all of them, and still I could get a professional degree, mostly to keep my parents happy, but also to feel a sense of sort of having professional qualification at the end of all that. Why not? And once I came to know a little bit more about sort of, national law universities and their models of integrated education of social sciences, humanities, and law, I kind of geared towards it. And yeah, so law for me was kind of an option of the decision was first made to study humanities, social sciences, and law was more of kind of face saver, so to speak, in front of my parents, so that look, I will have a professional qualification, and now there are this corporate jobs available for this profession in India, and I can have a stable job. But to be honest, I started really liking law once I entered the law school. It and it and it was only natural. I think all the subjects fit very well with law, and there's a reason why there is uh, that an integrated legal education program started in India in 80s. It's this realization that it cannot be studied in the absence of social science, and legal training only helps you become a better uh, not social scientist, but a better student of social sciences as well. So it helps you understand history, economics, politics in a very different way than you would if you didn't have a law background. In the same way, it helps you understand law, I think, in much more fulfilling way. And that's how law happened to me. Uh, uh, and in some ways that has influenced my philosophy about law since then, about what a role of lawyer should be, about what the role of legal education should be, is is about this journey of realizing that what my previous interest was and how law tied to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, law in a way widens your horizon and makes you very wisely reason every step that you're taking. So now moving on, you did your LLM from Yale. Could you tell some of the aspiring LLM candidates as to why you chose Yale out of the other Ivy League colleges, and how sort of can they zero down to a particular college for their higher education?
So it all depends on exactly that. There's no right answer for this. It of course will depend on what you want out of an LLM, what you want to do after an LLM. Not that I was very sure, and that was in part the idea. One should not be too sure. One should have some plans, but if you're too sure, you will always try to narrow yourself down much more than and then in some ways deny yourself the privilege of being in these universities, which could really cliche, so to speak, but broaden your horizons. But the reason I chose Yale was mostly because of my interest in constitutional law, and then emerging, but now I think it's a full-fledged field, is law and technology. And Yale has a history of constitutional law scholarship influencing the US and comparative world as well. So in that way, I decided to apply for LLM towards the end of my fourth year, uh, and it's a 5-year course. So since then, I was just thinking which university would fit me most, and I realized that most of the scholarship I was referring to in my undergraduate research papers that I was writing, most of the interesting thoughts that have really provoked me were coming from scholars at Yale, and that kind of made the decision for me that if I mean, not that I was sure I'd get in, but if I get into law universities abroad, this would be my first choice. And yes, so to summarize, I think it's in part constitutional law focus, be just legal scholarship focus. I wanted to use my LLM not as a way into another legal market, but kind of a door into the world of legal scholarship, constitutional law theory, and and Yale fit very well with it because their LLM program is designed uh, for people who are studying in law uh, for the sake of uh, scholarship, not necessarily for the sake of for a job in the legal in the market of legal services. Not saying that LLM in some ways LLM at Yale prevents you from doing that, but clearly the focus of LLM was to have your research interest and to pursue them rather than sort of clear your courses, get a degree, and gear your year around getting that next job that you want. And that's why I chose to go there.
I mean, to draw a line here, we can say that the students should not choose the college according to the name of the college. Like, they should choose according to what course the college specializes in.
Uh, yes and no. If you're very sure exactly what you want to do, then yes, that might be a good idea. Now, I wouldn't go with the name. Definitely, yeah. Don't choose a college on the basis of their name, but do choose a. But it's completely fine if that college is not at the top of the field in your area of interest, but says generally very good. The reason being that um, there are very few people who would be very sure of exactly what they want to focus on, and one can debate if that's even a good thing if you're very sure. Right? And probably it might not be a bad idea to go to a place which is uh, generally very good, might not be very good in your specific field of interest, because that will offer you opportunities to actually, indulge yourself in areas of law that you might have thought you could have interest in, but you didn't really explore it. So that's fine to choose a broad university which you are certain of having, uh, very broad areas of expertise might not be the best place to go for your area of law. Now that's a balance that you have to strike, given of how certain you are, and sort of how curious you are about fields apart from yours.
So accurate. Also, Aradhya, I happened to read a Wall Street Journal article which talked about Yale being quite racist among all the other Ivy League colleges. I mean, it is known for accepting far lesser applications from Asian Americans and students of color. So, how do you see it? Did you experience any sort of racism or any sort of maybe such issue there?
So I think the racism that you're talking about, the admission procedures, or the discrimination more than racism, is a very specific kind of discrimination claim, right? Um, we can have a separate discussion about uh, general racism in this university, whether it exists, whether it's not. But to answer your more specific question, I think it's a very now let me put my hat of a lawyer, and I think it's a very patchy legal dispute. So right, so broadly the claim is that they are limiting the number of Asian American students who could have entered based on their say SAT scores or their academic profile, right? Broadly known as merit. While more Asian Americans could have entered, what Yale is doing is limiting the number of students so that it can have from other minority communities more admissions. Right? That's a basic discrimination claim. Now, whether that's true or not is has to do a lot both with the facts on place. There is only basic Justice Department inquiry right now, right? And also some broad normative questions of should should university admissions only happen on the basis of your grades and your profile, or should it also have to do with having a diverse classroom? Right? So the argument that Yale has is a, that we are not discriminating, but two, even if we are limiting the number of students, that might have to do with making a diverse classroom so that there are people from all kinds of races and all kinds of backgrounds. Now, what I've done for you is kind of summarize that would be the debate, right? If my general understanding is that I think admission departments in these universities do make an effort. Not saying they're always successful, but they do make an effort to admit diverse sort of sections of students, right, from multiple countries, multiple racial backgrounds. Now, whether whether they are successful at this or not, it's difficult to say.
I mean, adding on to it, I read Edward Said's work on Orientalism that criticized the education system in the US for Orientalizing the Middle East. I mean, all in all, the global South. I mean, everything non-Western is labeled unconventional or not normal. I mean, according to him, the West superiority is something that is instilled in the education system over there. So what is your stance on it? How did you see it? And what was your experience like studying there?
Yes, that's a very good question. Now, that's true. In these universities, it so happens that a lot of what you're studying, say, and in American universities, I think maybe more so, especially in law schools, which is that they are so preoccupied with the U.S. legal system, right? That anything that you're doing outside U.S., even if it's, and sometimes even if it's Europe, it's labeled as kind of, you know, it's not mainstream. It's you're still working on the margins, and especially then if you're working on India, South Asia, these areas, this could sometimes be distancing from what the mainstream in the law faculty and law schools in many American universities are. That said, I think one has to be and one has to be clear about what one wants from this university, right? So I was clear that I was going to Yale not to study Indian constitutional law, right? Like I did that in India. I'm not going there to study South Asian politics. I'm not going there to study. I was clear that I'm going to that university to understand the sort of history, theory, conceptual ideas behind American constitutionalism, right? Because that's one constitution and one country which is given sort of many concepts in constitutional law, which we change in many places and which take different forms in many other countries, but as kind of being an anchor to many constitutional developments in the world. So if one is clear about this as a student, then one can understand that, I mean, why one is going to those universities and what would be one's best use of time, apart from political debates about what should be done, right? How to make the spaces more diverse, how to make the spaces more, representative. But in very practical terms, as a student, how you would navigate is go there with a clear understanding that you are going there to learn from this, while not automatically imposing that on, say, the jurisdiction you are studying, right? So don't copy paste American concepts easily. Don't to say Indian constitution. Don't assume that what happened in this country's history, the politics that has influenced the way their constitutional law, their law has developed generally, could as it is, could be transplanted as it is. And that understanding one has to develop on one's own, and to be clear as to what, when you learn, to be clear as to what could be used, what couldn't be used. That is, I think, that could practically help many students who are thinking of approaching education in this universities are broadly preoccupied with concerns in the West.
Anyway, so Aradhya, moving on. What difference did you find in the legal education in India and abroad? And what are those few things that you would love to borrow or replicate in the Indian education system? Not just the legal education, but the Indian education as a whole.
Okay, that's a tall ask. But let me say a few things which my experience taught me and could be used more specifically. So, say in legal education, right? one big development, which is I think which US universities themselves are also on. It's an ongoing development there. It's still not. I don't think it's still in its heyday. I think that's still in the
Okay.
future. Is clinical legal education. Broadly, the idea is that law school shouldn't just be the place to teach you law and theory, but in some ways take that theory forward and use law schools as spaces to actually make some changes. Right? Let's not be over ambitious about what law school clinics could do, but even if it's on ground and seeing not just that as a contribution to society, but actually as part of your education as well, right? So that's a different argument. If what should be the better way to serve society, is it through clinics or just get your education, go out in the real world and actually serve? That's romanticization of clinics, but a non-romantic idea of clinics would be that it could be a better legal education. So what I mean broadly by clinics is many Indian universities and law schools have officially on paper have legal aid clinics, and I've worked in Bangalore NLS Bangalore legal aid clinic for 4 years.
Yeah.
I have headed it at some point. And we have tried to do a lot, but we realized that there are many shortcomings, many systemic shortcomings that at the end of the day, one student committee can't do unless there is a proper program that law schools put in place. But broadly, I would say is that seeing legal clinics as a source of education of another kind of legal training within law schools. I think there's a great potential of, and particularly in India. So there's this development in US universities happening now, but in India of bringing theory and practice together in some ways to clinics. And I hope there are a few good examples in India as well, which are just coming up. They're still in their early days. But hopefully we'll see a few more examples of university-based uh, law clinics, uh, which are combining scholarship, legal scholarship, and legal practice, and to giving you a more holistic training. Um, Now, second bit, which I would say about Indian system is kind of an independence that this universities and many of these universities thrive on, right? It's in education in many ways is, and I don't think that's only about social sciences education. That's also about science education, right? As much as all my conversation with science friends, I used to think, oh, science should be very certain, and everything that you're working on will definitely lead to next big thing, right? But that's not true, right? My PhD friends here in sciences are many it's like social sciences in some ways where there is no final argument. There is no every PhD is not leading to a new discovery or invention, right? Um, it's in some ways hedging a bet for one argument or another, with of course your evidences and stuff like that. So broadly, the idea is understanding research education in India as at least to a few places, give enough independence and freedom, and take it like a bet that you're playing, right? It's like it's a risk that you take uh, to give to universities in their research capacities more freedom, right? Might attract good talent uh, to be in India, right? To teach in India, to do research in India, but at the same time, many arguments are often made that, oh, it's because the universities can't pay enough, etc. Right? But a lot of it has to do with having universities having enough independence and freedom, which many of universities in the West enjoy quite a bit. Um, there could be many, right? I mean, there are things not to learn, right, from say the US. There are things not to learn that uh, the education debt, the college debt that the students go through there, right? So American citizens themselves who are studying in these universities graduate with many of them graduate with humongous debts, right? We shouldn't. We should make sure that at least the basic education and even next to say till undergraduate college education, etc. We shouldn't create that situation where our kind of people who don't want to be saying research just want to go out there, right? Just want to do the jobs, are not entering into job market with huge loans and debts, and in some ways at least having access to very simple education in all fields available without much of, and in some ways I don't think we're anywhere near there, but that's something with the growth of private universities. Not that private universities are bad, It's just that one thing needs to be kept in mind, that we do devise mechanisms in which we don't end up there. Yeah, broadly, I think this would be, but I'm, I'm sure this requires a separate podcast altogether as to what we could learn from or not learn from the US or Western education system generally.
Aradhya, you mentioned that point about the American debt. I mean, the students, they graduate with humongous debt. So also, while studying here, I am facing this challenge of working part-time and balancing my studies at the same time because I'm not on 100% scholarship. So, and at this juncture, I don't even feel like asking for money from my parents. So, I mean, what is your take on studying abroad without a scholarship? Do you think that there'll be a good return on investment when they come back to India?
I mean, look, this is this question has so many ifs and buts in between, right? It depends so much on first question that you should ask is if you're thinking of return of investment is what you're going to do after that, right? Which is what's your best case scenario, what's your worst case scenario, and what's your kind of most likely scenario in what you'll end up doing after your education, right? So what kind of job will you get, how much it will pay, and whether this investment is good enough, like over time, to get the returns. It might come down to, and not almost calculation, not exactly, but almost like simple calculation, right? On and how much are you ready to invest? Um, I don't think so. There's no clear answer. I wouldn't say, oh, don't do a master's because there is no scholarship, because you might want to do certain jobs which will anyway keep you comfortable, right? So if there's someone in law field, if someone is going and doing masters and intends to work in corporate law sector or work in the law firms, then there is an argument that that degree is giving you access to these jobs, and these jobs over time will earn you enough. So even if you're taking a loan or something, you'll be able to pay that because of these jobs. But if say you want to come back into academia in India, then it might not be the wisest uh, option unless you're comfortable spending that much money, because you will probably not end up earning that much anytime soon in India. So the decision of whether to go ahead with it without funding is a very personal and very ifs and buts decisions about where you're placed, what you want to do. Um, yeah, that's what my answer would be. In my case, I was sure, I wouldn't almost sure that unless I'm getting substantial funding, I wouldn't do it, because I didn't intend to be to at least then take up corporate law jobs abroad or in India, and mostly because of my intention of doing an LLM was sort of exploring my intellectual interests. And if that's what you want to do, then yes, it would be advised to not, I mean, unless you're comfortable paying and the parents are comfortable, or um, so that's where scholarship becomes very important, right? But yeah, if your career goals are very different, then yes, then it might be worth it to actually go ahead um, with with it. And it of course depends on your financial situation.
Yeah, I ask this question because I feel that in India, studying abroad has become like a very charming affair. Everyone wants to
Yeah,
go abroad and,
yeah,
live that life. They don't really
yeah,
understand the hardship that's involved if you don't go with a scholarship. So,
yeah. So that is a very important point. So whatever decision you take, whoever takes, uh, one shouldn't take it only because you're going to go abroad and study. I mean, so. If you are asking if there's any bad reason to pay, then I think that's the bad reason. To be honest. If you're paying for escape, then no, that's a bad reason to pay. I mean, just just of going there and studying without a plan, right? But if you have broad plan in place, um, if you have your best, worst, and sort of most likely scenarios in place, then maybe. But yeah, I agree with you. Just studying abroad for the charm of it can maybe a difficult decision for most people in India, unless you are very comfortable financially.
yeah. Anyway, proceeding further, Radha, according to you, how has the dynamics of law changed in India over the years, and how can students explore more career options in this field? I mean, it would be great if you could give your insights, especially on the scope of legal research and policy in India, and how can students prepare themselves for it?
Sure. So over the last few years and say almost a decade now, one sector that has sort of really boomed in India, I mean, not boom is a wrong choice of words, but one sector that is really doing well, I feel, at least in terms of job opportunities, whether its outcome and whether its contribution is good enough or not is yet to be judged. But in terms of job opportunities, is the policy sector, right? So we have seen over the last 10 years coming up of many policy think tanks with full-time employees, not just in and law is one of course, very closely connected with the field of policy, and we'll talk about it later. But that's why I thought that legal education would be really good because in some ways it's as close as it can get to policy making in terms of what your undergraduate education could be. Um, so that's one field where it's so it's not that it's waiting for you to kind of change to just join and rise up in the ladder because in some ways the ladder is not clear yet. There are a lot of options of playing around in that field. There are a lot of options of opening new things. There are options of the term that's often used in the start for right disruption.
Hmm.
Um, um, and in some ways, I guess AFPR could be a part of it, right? Um, so and that's also exciting as to why that's happening, right? That's happening precisely because there's a sense that we are at the cusp of important moments, right? As a country, that some of the major policy decisions are probably going to be made over next decade or so. Um, Maybe about urban development. Cities don't develop again and again. This might be the point where in the urban development decisions might have to be made. May it be investments, may it be social policy, right? All kinds of decisions. There are so almost in every sector in India. There are so many decisions that have to be made. There are so many policies that new systems which are probably going to last for a really long time. And hence one can see the enthusiasm in this sector. Um, Now, of course, there are other legal fields available. Right? There are corporate jobs. There are of course, litigation chambers. Um, Another new field, which in India, for say, before national law universities came up, and there was a period of time when legal scholarship was kind of like legal academia kind of faced I wouldn't say crisis, but many problems in really thriving in India. There have been some excellent academics, right? But broadly, the ecosystem was missing, like it was present in many other fields, right? Related fields like economics or maybe in politics, but it was kind of absent in when it comes to law, or at least not as thriving. And that's one new field. There are so um, there are so many people who are now choosing to make a career in Indian legal academia, even though they could have had a career abroad, probably a much more. And academia is somewhere where having an ecosystem of people interested in similar research or at least responding to your research is very important. And um, that's slowly developing in India. There are many new organizations coming up. There are new universities and even old universities are now slowly adapting to this new culture of legal research and academia. Um, and a great contribution, and I'm really glad that this is happening, is many of this many of law students in India, right? So, uh, uh, not any particular law universities, but broadly, almost all major law schools in India. Um, there is this growing sort of importance of research and writing. And we can probably discuss this later, but there's so much writing happening right now on law, and I come across some really good, really brilliant blog posts, uh, short articles, essays by students in India, which are much better than than sometimes output of average faculty members, which is really quite delightful. That's one of the really good developments that is happening, and that might be kind of um, that 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 gives you some hope that both legal academia and policy research could probably be with sort of in the best hands, with the students really taking interest now in publishing writing research.
Aradhya, let's talk about your award-winning article, which I must say has a very catchy title. Where's the Party? Towards a constitutional biography of political parties in India. Could you throw some light upon it?
Yeah, sure. I wish clickbaits worked in academia, but they don't. Um, but I think it was just me playing with the title and hence the title of the article. So broadly, I started working on that topic. Um, I first got inspired in the US to think about this topic broadly because we think about constitutional law as and most lawyers would understand exactly what I'm saying, right? You don't find mention of political parties in Indian Constitution except one provision which was introduced in 1985, which is anti-defection amendment, and that too is not um, any serious regulation of parties themselves. Uh, and I always thought, why is that so? They are such important institutions and organizations, and um, one argument that I often found was constitutions are about legislature, executive, judiciary. That's it. Like that's they can just divide powers among different functions. They can't really do anything about politics, and that's correct. There's limitations to how much constitutions can really contribute to change or constrain politics. Um, and that's what. But I realized that um, there's a huge debate in the U.S. that time that was, and this has been going on for quite a while, right? Um, about how partisanship impacts the constitutional practice, right? So it depends on which political party you are. It's it might impact which state and how the state-center relationships are, right? Now, what do you mean when you say executive control of power, legislative control of executive, um, when the party is controlled by party leadership, which is the cabinet, right? So, and of course, like all the members of the legislature are members of the party. It's in a way, where is the legislative check, right? In the context of disciplined parties where independent, where MPs can't take their own stances. Um, so in some ways, it kind of shattered a lot of fictions and myths that I had about which in common sense I knew, right, but never articulated in academic terms. All of us kind of created this illusion of, yeah, there is legislative check on executive. Yeah, there is state-central relationship is about the state and the center, not about partisan disputes, etc. And so the idea, as I say in the article, it was more of a conversation starter. It was not to give the solution to these problems, but to articulate it and say that there are these areas where see there could be different ways of arranging the constitution, which even our founders discussed in the Constituent Assembly. Um, and not necessarily all of them were very wise suggestions, but do bring out some interesting debates about opposition role in the constitution, right? Bring out interesting debates um, um, about cabinet arrangement, right? And about federalism, governor's position, um, and so the idea of paper was to put political parties as kind of at the center of the structural arrangements of power in the constitution and then see how the structural arrangement looked like. Uh, yeah, that was the broad idea, um, and kind of look at it at 1985 Act, the Anti-Defection Amendment, and how that amendment also, of course, did a very specific thing of disqualifying MPs who voted against the party, but had a broader impact on the way constitutional structure itself worked, which is that it by turning parties more disciplined, you turn many arrangements of power on their head, and they look very different from what was intended to be. So the words remain the same, but that one amendment, and as a result, disciplined parties could make the entire constitutional structure in operation very different. And this is this yeah. So that was the intention of the paper, to show constitution in practice and constitution on paper, and how parties change constitution in practice while keeping the same constitution on paper.
Very informative, I must say. Now let's talk about your another interesting piece, which is Where's the Money? The Law of Party Funding, where you talked
Yeah,
about electoral bonds and party funding trilemma. So could you
yeah,
talk about that a little?
yes, definitely. Before I talk about, I promise you, after Where's the Party, Where's the Money, there is no third paper in mind yet. If there is, so yeah, there is no trilogy there, so to speak. But yeah, this paper, after I finished working on parties, I realized that one of the major sort of shortcomings in thinking about parties is the money, right? Where's the money? Where's money coming from? And a major reason is that we don't have much information. We have very uh, some researchers have tried to do very interesting work on sort of trying to figure out where the money is coming from, where it's going. But I thought, let's see what law has tried to do about it. The idea was to see the history of party funding regime in India as to how the law since 1950s regulated uh, how parties will get money. It's a different thing as to how much of that law was really operational, but at least to see, no one had before this properly done a study, historical study of even just the black letter law, the context under which the black letter law was made. And hence I thought there's a huge gap, right? Another one of those things which in India there are so many things that are not written about, and it
Yeah.
gives an opportunity to really go in the basics, go to the basics, and even culling out a lot of information is a huge task because of um, absence of a lot of research that should have already happened on this field. Um, but so that paper was sort of historical account of of how the law that regulates a who gets to contribute to the party, and b uh, how how the transparency of that funding works, or how the disclosures or non-disclosure depends on how the law at different points are shaped. And the trilemma that I talked about was probably a trilemma between three things, which is um, transparency on one hand, um, having uh, more formal economy contributions rather than under the table black,
Hmm.
so to speak, black money contributions to the party, uh, and third being the um, sorry, yeah. So the so, and this too will often interact with the third part of that trilemma, which is broadly the cash versus broadening. So it will be about broadening the constituency of funding. By broadening the constituency of funders, I mean uh, fewer the legal funders are, right? So until 1985, between 69 and 85, corporate funding in India was banned, and that time saw sort of political funding going further underground, right? Uh, and that was an important learning. That's important to have broader sets of people in a country getting to legally contribute to the party. So these are the three stools, so to speak, or sort of three ends of this dilemma. And my argument was that India's constantly struggled with balancing this three, and you could either have cash donations while maintaining broad constituency of funders and um, and have and no transparency, or you can have transparency and formal economic contributions. Sorry, you can have broadened constituency and formal economic contributions, but you'll have to then or at least the governments have thought that they will have to set kind of compromise on transparency. And electoral bonds was an example for this. The justification that the government has is that, look, there's many of these corporate uh, funders don't want to fund in a formal economy way, which is through banks and checks and all of that. Because the major trouble is that what if the other party comes to know, whoever that party is, whether they are in power in state government or central government, and would they then deny privileges or benefits to these corporate houses? Uh, and yes, governments control a lot, right? They control many business regulations, many discretionary functions that they have. And that kind of led to sort of giving them room to contribute. Uh, so it would be false to say that electoral bonds make it more transparent. They
Hmm.
definitely compromise transparency. but an honest conversation with the government, right? I mean, not the one that the publicly will be put up, of course, but an honest conversation will bring out the point that yes, but that's the point. The point of it is to curtail transparency so that more money could be donated through formal channels, while at the same time corporates are donating money. You don't have to rely on under the table. Now, my argument is that that's a fair, given the political economy of Indian states, that could be a fair argument, but it doesn't withstand the constitutional scrutiny. It doesn't stand constitutional scrutiny because of there's a detailed argument in the paper, but broadly the argument is right to receive information as is being interpreted by the courts over time. That electoral bond definitely doesn't let me know where the party that I'm going to vote for will get the money from, right? And if I don't get to know where party is getting the money from, how would I really figure out the interests of the party um, as a voter? And court has held before that that right to vote involves you knowing about your candidates, including whether they have any economic interest in the government, whether, for instance, contracts, whether they're signed in government contracts, right? Where the property of their family members. If that's important for me to vote, then it's also important for me to vote and choose my party uh, where they're getting money from to come to really figure out who they ultimately going to work for. Um, Now, of course, that argument has to be made in the court, and the case has been pending for a while. Whether that will stand or not, time will tell. But that was the broad understanding of the case to understand why government would do it, to give it a fair hearing. But then argument is that it still violates the constitution, constitutional law as it exists.
Yeah. I mean, I really liked a point in your paper while reading it that the stricter the transparency norms get, the more opaque the political funding becomes. Because I myself am a huge
Could
supporter
become,
of limited
yeah,
regulation. Yeah. So, in my
yeah,
opinion, yeah, over-regulation mostly opens the dark avenues towards more illicit activities and trade. And that is
totally.
also
And
one of
India
the
has had
points that
that
you, yeah.
experience from India has had that experience when the corporate funding was banned. So it wasn't that the funding was really not coming to parties. It was just
Mm,
that it was taking really dark
to the
forms
table.
than it would otherwise. And that has been the case in many where given political economy where say 85 to 90% of transaction is happening through cash, uh, and a huge chunk of black economy, and by black economy I broadly mean which is not accounted for. They might not be illicit purposes, which is black.
Yeah.
Well, as broadly understood, as formal term of the ministry is black economy, right? So, um, um, if you understand it as that, then if it's in that political economy context, then yes, it could. Not in every political economy context. Transparency will not automatically lead to more opaque funding. Of course, in fact that's the counterintuitive idea, right? Why would it?
Yeah. Okay, so Aradhya, the next question is that if I ask you to choose one of your writings out of all your writings, I mean, I know it's just how a mother can't choose a favorite child. Similarly, you can't choose your favorite piece of writing, but still, if you would have to pick one of your writings, which is like really close to your heart, which one would that be?
It's difficult, but um, it would actually most of the writings that I really like are not published. They are just with me sitting. In some ways, as they say, publishing and all this is the tax you pay for the fun you have for reading, researching, and writing. And just that the most dearest things are the ones that I've not paid tax on or not counted as. Um, but I would say Where's the Party paper was received
Hmm.
very well in many circles and I've had much more engagement with that paper. Um, and that's why out of all the publicly available writings, I would say that's very dear to me. Um, yeah,
Hmm. Me too. I mean, because of the title of your writing, it's so millennial. Where's the party?
well, never judge a book by its cover and paper by its title, but I don't know. Sometimes you do.
Moving on, considering a lot of protests that have been making rounds against almost every move of the government, especially the central government. Do you think that our youth today is well informed and aware about the politics in India, or are they just hinging on to the ideologies and opinions of some viral YouTubers? Because a lot of these youngsters, they watch like a 5-minute YouTube video on a particular issue. They do not do their research, do not frame their opinion. It's just the social media snippet through which they form these ideas. So what is your take on that? Do you really think the youth is aware about it?
Um, sure. I mean, look, this social media platforms, of course, I mean, one could argue that's their function, right? Whether it be pro-government protests, or not protests, but pro-government organizing, anti-government organizing. Um, the platforms thrive on hyper-partisanship, right? They thrive
Hmm.
um, on sort of and that may not be so. I'm not saying that's intrinsic to this. Maybe there is some other way to do it, right? Um, but but that's the idea, right? The idea of many of the platforms is to make sure that you are by showing you similar content again and again. Even though I'm sure some people in these organizations might be trying other things. And whether you're protesting or whether you're supporting the government, in both ways, the idea is to find your camp, to find that to um, to sort of going viral, right? The pressures of going viral, whatever it um, is um, is on all sides. I don't think it's about anyone. I don't think it's about anyone being misguided, uh, as opposed to as opposed to what social media world uh, would want the activity, the favored activity to be, right? I'm no judge on this, right? I'm not a I probably I'm sure at some point or the other I might have fallen prey to this as well, and everything might have. But yeah, I guess one has to just be aware about it. One has just to make sure when does one have good reason to do so and when one doesn't, right? Um, when is it just a matter of a good Instagram pic, and when is it something that you would do even if someone tells you that it's not going to be anywhere online, it's just a thing that you did. So that's I guess that's generally a good filter for me when I participate in any political activity.
Yeah. I mean, talking
At
about
least for this. I mean, of course. There are things that you have to decide which cause you stand for or not, right? But just to filter this, whether it's social media which is leading me to do it or it's myself, right?
yeah.
As answering your question about why you're indulging in uh, all the political activities from either side.
Yeah. I mean, also because you're very interested in the politic political parties and into academia. So, linking the two of them, do you think somebody who would be working in a very close association, a researcher who would be working in a very close association with a political party, uh, will be influenced in some or the other way with the ideology of that party, and the research will be biased towards that ideology?
Could be. I have no experience, so would be difficult for me to really conclude if, um, as in, ideally one should be able to separate one's political association from the research one is doing. But uh, but that could come with just the academic ethics, right? I mean, that need not be. Yes, one could have some very basic biases about this, but that need not be. Um, uh, that need not be all of your research, right? That need not sort of cloud your judgment. Um, as one of my professors used to say, the distinction between an activist and academia is that you might choose to work on something um, 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 because you really care about it, right? But once you decide to work on it, and while you're working on it, the you should make a distinction between an activist and an academic, right? That you should
Yeah.
work as someone who's trying to find the right answer, irrespective of which camp one is in, if one is in any camp. Um, but to be honest, academia, and if you're in that research or academic situation, it kind of the entire industry, so to speak, if it's an industry, is based on an understanding of delayed gratification, of delayed results. Like some people blame academia for when research sort of environments for them that, or you research on things which take so much time for a simple argument to make, and it will take so much time for it to get published, and how does it matter? But I think by lowering the stakes, it makes you, um, it sort of forces you to make arguments which might be more rigorous, might not suit you, because if the stakes were very high, right? If your research is immediately going to change the world, then you might care a lot about it changing the way your intuitions might want it to change,
Yeah.
as opposed to what would be ideal change, which you might not agree, or which you might not want as kind of a political animal or an activist, right? But you might know that this might just be correct. It might not be the thing that you can't want, so to speak. Um, so both are. I mean, I think that both have different temperaments, and in some ways, the activist temperament. I'm not saying activist per se, but I'm sure at some level I am. I have an activist temperament, not in the sense of activism in a pejorative sense, or in a very sort of romantic sense, but the fact that I do care about bringing some good change in the world, right? And hopefully that research could inform us about what good changes could be brought, or what good things could be retained for that matter. It may not be changed, right? Um, and that's important to not lose the purpose, to not go into an academic black hole where it doesn't matter at all, right? Where it's only for purely its own sake. Not saying that's bad, but that anchors me well. At the same time, having that academic sort of temperament at this point, where it helps me to not fall into choosing my tribe, into choosing my camp, and just that the rigorous ethics of academia can force you to do that, right? Because if you're making an argument which might conform with your politics but is not rigorously argued, then um, hopefully academia is not so hyper partisan that someone will let you go, right? The idea is that someone will raise an argument, you have said so and so, but there is a counter argument to this, and the fact that uh, uh, you have to approach counter arguments, you have to at least deal with counter arguments, you will not agree with them, even if half-heartedly. I do think is a great check on you turning out with hyper partisan, or at least it works with me.
Yeah.
Not to say one shouldn't choose the sides, and one shouldn't, but I think that one should always sit on the fence or anything, but just that one should just be better informed um,
Yeah.
about the case. Yeah.
Yeah. Moving on, Aradhya, since a lot of young law students look up to you, I being one of them, so if you could just give us some piece of advice relating to life in general.
Oh,
Some
um,
motivational push, some
oh,
motivational quote.
oh no. I wish I should ask them. I should ask you this question. um, no, I think the best lesson is that, and I might be not quoting it right, and I don't even remember who said this. Is sometimes the most important things happen to you while you're planning something else, or different, or completely different, right? Or something along those lines. And I think that's the life lesson, to calm your nerves, to uh, I think very wise. Um, the You can only plan so much. Uh, you can only work so many things that are outside your control. Uh, your merit is to a large extent outside your control, and your failure too. And I think in these times, that lesson is very important to learn. Yeah, that's what I would say. I wish
Yeah.
I had something which would wake people up, but alas, no.
No, that was inspiring. Trust me. Now, we're moving towards the close to our podcast, but before that, one last question, Aradhya. At such a young age, you've achieved so much. It's so inspiring, trust me. How do you strike a balance between your personal life and work? I mean, do you even have a personal life, or you are in a full-time committed relationship with your work?
No, I do have personal life. I have really good friends who I think only help me do my work well. And yeah, I think it's about uh, learning to say no to some work and to some personal commitments, and learning to say yes. It's about making that choice. I um, Yeah, I think both only contributes to each other. Today, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg of Supreme Court passed away, and
Mm,
I remember a very interesting question that was asked to her once, um, when in one of her interviews, and the question was how. So she entered a law school with a young kid, with like 1 year or 2 year old kid, something like that, and someone asked her, "How do you manage to be at the top of your class while there was this kid, right? You have to go back to home to her. You have to give so much time to a 1 year or 2 year old kid." And her answer was that I could do well in law school precisely because of that, not despite. Um, and I guess a big lesson there is that does not either or mostly in these decisions.
mm,
And the more kind of um, meaningful personal life you have, it could contribute very well to your professional commitments. That said, these are just big words from a small mouth. But since I'm just quoting Justice Ginsburg, the late Justice Ginsburg, I think I could be pardoned for that.
You know why? Because while writing your bio, I was thinking that, okay, this man does not have 24 hours a day. He has more than that. He's blessed with more hours than us, considering so much work you've done in your life till now.
Oh, no, trust me, there are people I think about the same. So, yeah.
Anyway, thank you so much, Radha. It was so nice having you for our first episode. And keep in touch with our organization. We wish you all the best for all your future endeavors. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the interview, and good luck.
And to all the viewers, please like, share, and subscribe to our podcast. Thank you so much.